At 1 p.m. on March 23, 1806, Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark and their charges, the U.S. Corps of Discovery, with Lewis's dog Seaman and Clark's servant York, departed from their self-constructed Fort Clatsop near the Pacific Ocean coast in what would later be regarded as the Oregon Territory. St. Louis was the then destination. First, though, the party of explorers had to retrace their inbound route, traveling up the Columbia River, over the Rocky Mountains, and down the Missouri River. They would be successful, with but one death among the original group of roughly 40 men who entered the Louisiana Territory in the spring of 1804. Arriving back in St. Louis, men of the expedition received a hearty welcome on September 23, 1806. The journals of Lewis and Clark were eventually published years after their return and report to the U.S. government. Journals were also kept by Sergeants Patrick Gass, Charles Floyd, until his death, George Ordway, and Private Joseph Wayhouse. Patrick Gass's writings were probably the most well-known other than the daily record kept by Lewis and Clark. Gass's version of the journey was also most quickly put into print and distributed roughly a year after the expedition was complete. I wish to quote from an introduction to Sergeant Gass's journal, published after the expedition, 1807.
That, after great enterprises, honor and reward should go in vast proportion to the leaders, the followers being little noted, is the ordinary course of things, and perhaps not unjust. For important accomplishments, good leadership is almost everything, but not quite all. To leadership, a following is essential, and it is wholly unfair if the following gets nothing. As regards the expedition of Lewis and Clark, while the captains are distinguished in our history, the recognition that has gone to the rank and file is meager indeed. In celebration of the former, the trumpets need no longer blow. In behalf of the latter, however, a reveille may be appropriately sounded, for as to their merit, the world has slept. That the captains themselves had a good opinion of their men is easily ascertained.
Also noted in Gass's introduction is a general commendation stated by Lewis and preserved for history. Lewis refers to the muster roll of the party, comprising 2 large sheets of foolscap, pasted together top and bottom, formally ruled off for the numbered list of names, rank, and remarks, still preserved in the Smithsonian Museum at Washington. He concludes as follows: with respect to all the persons whose names are entered upon this roll, I feel peculiar pleasure in declaring that the ample support which they gave us under every difficulty, the manly firmness which they evinced on every necessary occasion, and the patience and fortitude with which they had submitted to and bore the fatigues and painful sufferings incident to my late tour to the Pacific Ocean, entitles them to my warmest approbation and thanks.
nor will I suppress the expression of a hope that the recollection of services thus faithfully performed will meet a just reward in an ample remuneration on the part of our government.
Meriwether Lewis, Captain 1st U.S. Regiment Infantry. As mid-March approached, scarcity of food was still a primary concern of Lewis and Clark. Even the Indians further up the Columbia River reportedly were deprived of sufficient food. At one point, Lewis wrote, "These poor people appear to be almost starved. They picked up the bones and little pieces of refuse meat which had been thrown away by the party." In 1806, the Corps of Discovery Party had spent almost all of their budget. The expedition was traveling now with only powder, dry powder, scientific instruments, some kettles, dried fish and roots, clothes and rifles, plus maybe a couple of handkerchiefs of trinkets for Indian trade. Their whole stock of goods on which they had to depend, either for purchase of horses or of food, and during the nearly 4,000 miles journey back to St. Louis, quote, is so diminished that it might all be tied in 2 handkerchiefs, according to Lewis. As they pushed canoes and baggage up the Columbia, a scarcity of game was an embarrassment of the party. Lewis turned his attention again to the nature of the land and geography, wildlife, and people scattered on the riverbanks, describing places like Multnomah Village and the river, which later is identified as the Willamette, and Mount Jefferson. This valley between the coastal mountains and Cascades, Lewis concluded, is the only desirable situation for a settlement which I have seen on the west side of the Rocky Mountains. Whether or not he actually saw the now famous tourist Multnomah Falls plunging from the cliffs of the Columbia Gorge through thick trees and thickets is not clear. Multnomah Falls is roughly twice as high as the immense fall of the 300 feet that Lewis had apparently referred to in his reports.
During the whole route from our camp, we passed along under high, steep, and rocky sides of the mountains, which now close on each side of the river, forming stupendous precipices covered with fir and white cedar. Down these heights frequently descend the most beautiful cascades, one of which, a large creek, throws itself over a perpendicular rock 300 feet above the water, while other similar or smaller streams precipitate themselves from a still greater height or elevation, and evaporating in a mist again, collect and form a second cascade before they reach the bottom of the rocks. We stopped to breakfast at this village. The country is covered with thick growth of timber. The water, however, is shallow for the distance of 4 miles from shore. Although there is a channel deep enough for canoes on the south side, yet, as the tide was low, we found some difficulty in passing along.
Hunters returned to the shore camp with an agreeable supply of large eagles and a large goose. Lewis recorded various sightings of wildlife, including garter snakes, which appear in large quantities and are scattered through the prairies in large bundles of 40 or 50 and twined round each other. 2 black bears were sighted on April 8th. The party traveled past Wapatu Island, now called Sauvie Island, in the state of Oregon, a very large flat feature heavily surrounded by a bulb plant eaten by the Indians, known then as the common arrowhead. Then on up the Columbia to Rock Fort, place where they had camped on the westbound trip, and Sepulchre Rock, or Mamalusa Island, near the mouth of the Willamette River, where many dead persons were buried, and, quote,
where the low country begins and the longleaf pine is almost the exclusive growth of timber. The climate, too, is here very different from that we have lately experienced. The air is drier and more pure. There is also a species of hyacinth growing in the plains, which presents at this time a pretty flower of pale blue color, and the bulb of which is boiled and baked or dried in the sun and eaten by the Indians.
Captain Clark had, in the meantime, been endeavoring to purchase horses without success. On Thursday, April 17, Clark sent to inform Lewis that he was still unable to purchase any horses. The next day, however, on April 18th, Clark admitted he had procured 4 of them. The horses, however,
Though good, suffer much, as do in fact all Indian horses with sore backs.
by the end of the month, the Corps had 23 horses, according to Lewis, quote, many of whom were young and excellent animals, but the greater part of them were afflicted with sore backs. At times, the Corps did experience much hospitality from the natives, but many, quote, strange Indians included individuals from communities that had not been encountered before on the westward downstream route last year. Earlier, on April 1, 3 Indians had followed the travelers and encamped near the party. They told the captains that a great scarcity of provisions upstream had induced them to come down in hopes of finding subsistence, quote, in this fertile valley. They were in much distress for want of food, having consumed their winter store of dried fish and not expecting the return of salmon before the next full moon, which would be on or about the 2nd of May. But hospitality was limited throughout that month. Lewis complained about the difficulties in getting the canoes they needed, as the Indians, quote,
valued their canoes too highly. In the course of dealings, we purchased a canoe from an Indian, for which we gave wampum beads. He seemed perfectly satisfied and then went away, but returned soon after, canceled the bargain, and giving back the wampum, requested that we would restore him the canoe. To this we consented, as we knew this method of trading to be very common and deemed perfectly fair.
Later, though, Captain Lewis made a different controversial decision, coming up with a rationalization to steal another canoe because they needed it.
We yet wanted another canoe, as the Clatsops will not sell us one at a price that we can afford to give. We will take one of them in lieu of 6 elk, which they stole from us in the winter.
Lewis didn't record the deed, but Sergeant Ordway did. The explorers needed canoes in order to get at least to the falls of the Upper Columbia, at which point they would also then desperately need horses. On the Lower Columbia, the natives had become less friendly. The Corps men became very unhappy with many Chinook attempts to steal their properties, an inclination that the party had not encountered previously among the Chopinish, or another name for Nez Perce, who lived further up the Columbia. The Indians caused, quote, great consternation and several incidents of near violence. Tempers ran high. One party of warriors tried to steal a tomahawk from John Coulter. Private Shields had to pull his knife. One evening, 3 Indians stole Lewis's dog, Seaman. An enraged Lewis dispatched soldiers and thus frightened the thieves to let the dog go. Lewis told a group hanging about the camp that if they made any further attempts to steal property or insulted the men, quote, we should put them to instant death. Lewis declared he had it in his power to kill them all and set fire to their houses.
I am convinced that no other consideration but our number at this moment protects us,
Lewis wrote.
We keep ourselves perfectly on our guard.
So the party was looking forward to getting out of the Chinookan country and back into the land of the more friendly Nez Perce. They expected those natives, Lewis penned, will treat us with much more hospitality than those we are now with. On April 22, local Chinookans stole a paddle and a robe. Lewis ordered a thorough village search, finding the stolen goods hidden in a corner of one of the houses. This was fortunate to both the villagers and the expedition. Despite his cold-blooded words and resolutions, Stephen Ambrose wrote in his book Undaunted Courage, quote, what stands out about Lewis's journey up the Lower Columbia in the spring of 1806 is that he got through it without ever once ordering a man to put a torch to an Indian home, and no man ever fired a rifle at a native. Lewis had, however, several times lost his temper and threatened to kill. The captains decided that once they got into the open plains above the Dalles, they would abandon the canoes and go overland to the mountains. To do that, though, they needed as many horses as they could purchase. But it was difficult to make deals with the Indians again, and they had already spent at least 90% of their budget. On April 24, the expedition marched overland by foot with only 4 horses. Now they were on open, level, sandy plains and reached the branch of the Walla Walla River. Lewis commented on the unusual affection for the whites among these people. On April 28, they left behind what is today the state of Oregon, following the Columbia to the Snake River in southeastern Washington and beyond into the plains of Idaho. On Thursday, May 1, they collected the horses and after breakfast set out, about 7 o'clock, to follow the road up the creek. They had beaver for dinner. Lewis's journal states,
We may indeed justly affirm that all the Indians whom we have met since leaving the United States, the Walla Wallas, were the most hospitable, honest, and sincere.
Lewis later lavished even more praise on the Chopinish.